Welcome back to the B-Sides of Sports, Season 3, Episode 5. After a brief break due to me getting married and going on my honeymoon, we now resume with NFL Week 9. And also, so we have two more pods that are going to come out right before this one. And the reason those didn't get out on time is my laptop broke, and like I said, just got married, so you just have to bear with us there for a while. It was such a big gap. We were trying to make it so it would only be 3 or 4 weeks, but instead it was like, I think 7, and we apologize for that. It was just the nature of everything. Obviously, I had a lot on my plate, and so yeah, that's just kind of the case of that. But anyways, getting into Week 9 now, we have 3 games we kind of want to highlight at first here. 2 for these sort of number 1 seed matchups, and then another game that was just very entertaining. So starting off, we're just going to talk about the one with not nearly as much stakes, but still a very exciting game, candidate for game of the year when all is said and done, and that was the Bucs Texans. Wilson, what do you have to say about this game?
Yeah, talking about candidate for game of the year, I think, down the stretch of the NFL season, we might not look back at this game and think that it had super big playoff implications or anything of that extent. But I think just from a pure gameplay standpoint and just watching a football game unfold this Sunday afternoon, this has to be up there. Just an incredible performance by both sides, particularly on the offensive side, and not really as an indictment on the defenses. I thought both defenses played okay, all things considered, but when the offensive total was 76 points, the over-under line was set at 40.5. I think we've got to just go straight to the offensive side of the ball. And I really just wanted to start with the Texans, a super young and exciting team. I think this rebuild for the Texans has happened a lot quicker than a lot of people have considered. And truly on the backs of 2 people I really wanted to highlight. First being DeMeco Ryan. I think he's just done a fantastic job getting this team to believe and turning that culture around. A franchise that had a little bit of turmoil over the last couple of years just with some of the controversies, and then obviously just not a winning team the last year. Going into this year, I think a lot of people, again, considered them to be in contention for one of those top lottery picks. Instead, now after this game, they find themselves sitting at 4-4 at 500 on the season. And I don't think a playoff berth is outside, the realm of possibility. I think while it may still remain a little bit unlikely, I think, this team really believes in what they're doing. And the second person I want to point to is really CJ Stroud. The numbers, they speak for themselves today. All those rookie records he set, the most passing yards in a single game for a rookie at 470, just absolutely fantastic. And I think back to some of the conversations you and I had earlier in the year about the Texans and CJ Stroud, and you and I were both impressed early on with his play. We talked a lot about how he was the guy coming out of college with the highest floor, and a lot of people thought maybe one of the lower ceilings. And to me, I think he's continued to answer the questions week in and week out, throwing for 5 touchdowns today. CJ had, I think, only 6 touchdowns to his first 3 or 4 games of the season. To me, that was kind of one of the concerns early on. He was moving the ball well, but you could say a lot of that just falls on teams not having a lot of tape. But now he's really out there serving as an elite game manager and playmaker. And, the deep balls kind of come along a little bit. He made some huge passes today. And again, I just think the chemistry and the camaraderie of this young roster really has them believing. And it's just a fun team to watch every week.
Yeah, so, to kind of give praises to someone else for the Buccaneers, you talked a lot about CJ, who I, pretty much mirror the same thing. Same with DeMeco Ryan. I feel like every week we talk about the importance of a head coach, especially for a young team. I think having someone to really set the culture, again, look to the Raiders game this week. Sometimes all it takes, I think, really is someone to go in there and just give the guys one goal and make sure that they're all together, and they all have the same ideas. Because even with just, again, pitiful rushing attack, the team still fights. I mean, they've not run the ball well at all this year, and they keep getting over that. And a lot of that is thanks to DeMeco Ryan and CJ Stroud. But I also want to talk about their GM, Nick Cassero, who I think has put together a fantastic roster. I think acquisitions, especially like Noah Brown before the year, Dalton Schultz, and obviously drafting Tank Dell, a lot of these guys who are becoming really staples in the offense all came from acquisitions made by him. And obviously same thing with Nico Collins. I mean, all of their weapons they've put around their young quarterback and they'd set up for, with guys like Davis Mills, and guys who weren't the answer. But they got those pieces in place. So when they finally had a chance to get their guy CJ, they did. Then they made the bit risky move to trade up and get Will Anderson. But again, that's a move that's paying dividends, where that's a guy they wanted, and he's playing really great for them. The numbers aren't there yet, but he's really establishing that edge. I think a GM, there's always going to be holes on a roster. You're never going to have a perfect roster, and you can say that about the running game. But even then, I would say I think they have very talented backs in Singletary and Pierce. But again, a lot of that just comes down to, I guarantee next year that's going to be the issue they solve. Right before they needed receivers, they finally get receivers. Davis Mills wasn't the guy. Now they get the quarterback. They're getting the edge established after going through guys like Clowney and Watt. It's just always on to the next thing, and he's been there for quite some time. Even though they've been bad, I think this is now upcoming year will be his 4th year. Even though through all the bad years, because I think they wanted to give him a chance, and I think it's really going to pay dividends because, like you said, this team fights and has a lot of talent at a lot of different positions. Secondary is also getting very talented. Linebacker core is starting to play up. They got Henry To'oto'o, Blake Cashman. Again, these younger guys that they're acquiring, putting into the roster and just playing really well for them.
Absolutely. And, I think we should spend some time on the Bucs, but just to wrap up some points about the Texans real quickly, I can't just speak enough about how much I think establishing a winning culture really does for a franchise. I think oftentimes, as fans, we're very quick to say, oh, this is a team that should tank. And inside of a locker room, I think it's very hard to ask your players to go into a game with the mindset of we're going to lose this game. And obviously coaches never would outwardly say that, but I don't doubt that there are franchises that try to put rosters in a position to where they're not going to win games. And we saw that very loudly with the Texans last year. And to have this turnaround so quickly and so rapidly, again, it just speaks to what the front office did with that roster, overhauling many pieces of it and just bringing in a lot of those acquisitions. All credit around to that Texans front office and the roster, and it's just been fun for me to watch. Quickly on the Buccaneers side of things, I think the Baker Mayfield resurrection just continues to shine through. And, while the numbers aren't super gaudy, his play obviously has been I wouldn't say spectacular, but it's been really strong, definitely. And it's another one of those things where it feels like the roster believes in Baker, and it opens up, just a lot of the wide receivers, they're playing with conviction. The run game, I think it still leaves a little bit to be desired, but White's holding up his own a little bit right now. Again, the defense, it's hard to say when they gave up 39, but I think the defense fights, and I don't think, the performance today necessarily would have, if I had just seen, on like how the defense was playing, just seen a couple snaps, I wouldn't have guessed that they gave up 39 points, I guess is what I'm trying to say there.
No, I agree. I think I'm very interested to see how they head forward. I'm not big on Todd Bowles as a head coach. I never have been. But what I will say is I'm curious to see if they build around Baker. Kind of seems like Mike Evans is on the way out, but honestly, with how good of a rapport Baker has with Chris Godwin, that doesn't concern me too much. I wish they would have traded him to try to get something in return for him. But regardless, Rachaad White looks like he could be a very talented back, great pass catching back. I think he's really proven to be one of the better ones, especially young ones in the league right now. Cade Otton and Baker are really working well together. And so I just think, again, shore up some spots at the defense. They've had some issues at O-linemen due to retirement and season-ending injuries. I think they have $70 million in dead cap due to retirements, injuries, and so forth. Excuse me. And even with that, it's like you said, they're fighting. The Buccaneers, if you can say one thing, they're fighting, and they just have bad luck. I mean, this week they were 30 seconds away, one stop away from a win. Last week, if Chris Godwin turns his hips a little earlier, he catches a Hail Mary against the Bills, and they're a completely different team. They're 5-3 leading their division. I think so easily this team was 1 or 2 plays away from leading their division. So I really hope they ride out with Baker just at least another year, really try to get a team around him. Next year fails, I completely understand, just doing a board wipe, but I think, like you said, the team's fighting for Baker. I'd love to see them give him one more chance to really take this team the distance.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. I think moving on into our second matchup of this podcast, then that would be the Cowboys visiting the Eagles this week. And, for a lot of people, this was going to be the game of the week. And the game itself, super entertaining, in my opinion, in a lackluster afternoon slate this Sunday. Big performances from both sides. Obviously, the Eagles were able to pull it out. What are your major takeaways from this one?
I think my major takeaways from this one were the Eagles still just finding ways to win. I think really all I want to say about this game is, for a very important game, this could have helped set up the Cowboys to be the 1 seed, or it's further establishing the Eagles as the 1 seed. But I think the Eagles, their wins aren't pretty. They are not winning pretty games, don't get me wrong. But I think, sometimes being able to fight through the tough games is better than, blowouts. I mean, as we've seen with the Bills the last few years, they can't win the ugly ones, but they win the blowouts, right? And then they get to the playoffs. If they aren't blowing you out, they're going to lose. The Eagles are like the opposite. They're playing every game close, which is exhausting. It has its effect on the team. Jalen Hurts was gimpy at one point. I mean, and that's very concerning considering he really is the keynote of this offense and is really coming into his own despite the numbers kind of regressing from last year. But his tendency to run less is showing that he's progressing as a passer. And again, they're just winning games. Their secondary secondary, you can start to see the age. Guys like Garrett Bradbury and Darius Slay, great corners, but they're old. And you're starting to see that. That's why they, traded for a guy like Byard. But again, he's not young either. He's no spring chicken. So the Eagles keep winning, though, and the Cowboys seem to keep being their own worst nightmare. Like Wilson was saying, didn't really target CD, and his usage rate has been all over the place all year. And when you have a guy like that, it shouldn't be. Jake Ferguson, really tight end, usage all over the place. Tony Pollard has shown he's not capable of being a every down back, in my opinion. So there's just a lot of issues on the Cowboys that time and time again show up, because despite having over 400 yards of offense, almost, I'm pretty sure, 450 yards, you can't beat an Eagles team, and you had every opportunity, and in my opinion, it falls back on them.
Agree with everything you said there. Two major takeaways just to follow up. The first being that Philadelphia secondary, they really just don't look as fast as some of the other secondaries out there. You think Kansas City, and you think, the speed that Snead and McDuffie are able to generate on the outside. The Eagles really don't have that, and Dak really diced them up to the tune of nearly 400 passing yards today. You mentioned that, they weren't targeting CD a whole lot, and I think the numbers don't necessarily reflect that. Obviously, he had nearly 200 yards receiving, but early on in that game especially, right, when you think that you're going to come out hammering and really try to play to your strength, they were really trying to force the run, and Pollard wasn't able to get anything going on the ground. And in turn, they were making, Dak was kind of stationary, just playing kind of safe, not really taking any risks. And you saw that as the game went on and they were forced to pass the ball more, CD and Dak got their connection going, and they really started picking up steam, but it was too little too late, in my opinion. They were up against the clock at that point, and with that Philadelphia power run game, just not enough possessions at the end of that game. I think the other thought that came to mind watching this Philadelphia game and just seeing how they match up against Dallas, I don't know if anyone else out there has already said this before, so I don't mean to copyright anyone else's words here, but in a game of inches, to me, this feels like a little bit of an advantage in the Eagles, where it feels like they're playing 1st and 9 every possession, where the Cowboys were playing 1st and 10, right? And just that tush push brotherly shove play that Philadelphia is able to do with truly flawless execution when it matters. I know it hasn't worked a couple times, but to me, when they've needed to get it, they've always converted. I haven't seen a time where they needed to get that down and it hasn't worked out in their favor. And I just think that really makes a huge difference. Knowing that, every single possession, you can get the ball just 8 yards in 3 plays, and you can just, that 4th and 2 is basically a guaranteed down. Sirianni's able to go for it at his own 30, at any point in the game. And I just think that really changes the dynamic of how the game is played. And I think that explains why in a game where the Cowboys are able to generate, like you said, 450 yards of offense, they're still only managing 23 points because Philadelphia just can control so much clock and so much time of possession.
I'm curious. I don't want the play to be banned, but I kind of wish we could have a scenario where it is banned, just because I want to see them run a regular QB sneak. Because I think Jason Kelsey said it on the New Heights podcast. He said, or Travis Kelsey maybe, said what makes the brotherly shove so impressive isn't necessarily even as much the O-lineman as much as it is Jalen Hurts being built like a running back. I was watching it with my wife today, and she was talking about how he looked kind of pudgy, and I was like, no, he's just like a brick wall of a human being. I mean, he's so big and so strong. Watching him runs reminds me of a guy like Jonathan Taylor, in terms of when they're doing that, the way his legs just keep moving even as he's falling down the pile, or Derrick Henry. It's the balance, the core strength. So I think even if they ban it, I think they would still have success, and I don't think it would be as exaggerated, over 93% or whatever it is right now, but I still think it would work so much, and I'm, again, not in favor of banning it, but I think that's a great point there.
Absolutely. I like that take there too, because, people always imagine in this world where it's banned, the Eagles aren't able to replicate their level of success they have with the run game. But I think in turn, it makes them a little more strategic with how Hurts is running the ball, right? Instead of him just being pushed in a pile of mass. Brady was able to execute the quarterback sneak at an 80% rate. I don't doubt that Hurts could do it at a higher percentage.
Exactly. I agree.
Yeah. So with that, then I think we'll turn over to our third and final game of this A-Box slate, being the early game today in the international series for the NFL played in Germany today. The Chiefs took on the Dolphins, and which proved to be very much a Chiefs home game. I think we saw the home crowd really just kind of biased in favor of the team that's done the most winning over the last couple of years. So where do you want to start with this one?
I think, again, Mahomes in his post-game interview he says it's the best defense in the league. And now I don't necessarily agree with that point as much to the tune of a Denver Broncos whooping they just suffered. But I do think what they have is what we've seen in so many of the great teams recently, and that's a very skilled secondary as well as one who knows how to get away with murder, essentially, right? The Patriots did this for years. It's why they were so good. Aqib Talib, Stephon Gilmore, J.C. Jackson, say whatever you want about those guys, but they were great with the Patriots because they knew how to be physical, get away with contact, and as well as, again, generate pressure. The Patriots have always been good at that. Spagnuolo is fantastic at that. He sends crazy blitzes, and they just work. And so I think what you're seeing right now, more than anything, is the Chiefs' creativity on defense, creating opportunities for an offense that hasn't necessarily found itself yet. I think it will. They're the Chiefs. They always seem – it's Andy Reid. I will never doubt Andy Reid in my life. The dude has scored more points and scored better than anyone despite refusing to run for years, and now they actually run. So I think they'll eventually find their way out of this, and I think it's going to be relying a little bit more on guys like Rashee Rice and maybe MVS, because I think right now you just see Travis Kelce is so much of Mahomes' main focus. I think he needs just to get a little more comfortable with some of his other guys, and I think they won't miss a beat.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, I'll say it again. If the concern for the Chiefs is going to be that passing offense, it helps that they have arguably the best quarterback in the league and one of the greatest of all time, right? Like, it's really hard to sit here and be like, it's a huge concern that the Chiefs can't get their passing offense going, but then they have Mahomes under center, right? I think that just makes you feel a lot better about their woes if that's the case. And I like what you said about the run game. I think today, one of the big differences is Pacheco was really huge for the Chiefs early on in that game and establishing just the dual threat of that offense. Mostert, I think, statistically had a better day, but it just really felt like the Dolphins didn't ever establish a run game throughout today. And, we saw Tua really struggle when the secondary always knew, he was targeting either Hill or Waddle or Wilson out in the backfield. They just really weren't able to get anything deep going. And, again, by the time their offense got going, they ran out of possessions. And I don't think the Chiefs even scored in the second half, but they just had such a big lead that they were able to hang on to it. I would say about the Chiefs and just that receiver room right now, I think there's almost too much paradigm of choice out there, right? Mm-hmm. They're playing continuously, they're lining up 10 or 12 different guys across the field every single day. And, people can talk about how impressive it is that Mahomes is throwing the ball to so many guys. But at the same time, I think it speaks to a lack of identity. And in a day where we saw the Dolphins really bring a strong strategy against Kelce, completely took him out of the game. Nobody on the Chiefs had more than 34 receiving yards. And I think that becomes a problem, again, if they go on the road, if they're facing a tougher defense. And so, I feel good that they got the win, but I think, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, a little bit more later on. I think this might be a little bit more of an indictment on the Dolphins than it is a compliment to the Chiefs.
No, I really like what you said there. That's one of I haven't heard anyone say that, but I think that's very interesting, and I completely agree that there's too many options, and it's like I was saying, you just kind of said it in a better way, in my opinion, where it's like, exactly, those guys aren't on the field enough, because him and Rashee Rice, like, they've had some really good games together. I think Rashee Rice now is second on the team in touchdowns, receiving touchdowns with 5, I'm pretty sure, after today. So, like, he's starting to build a rapport with some of these guys, and you got, like, a guy like Mecole back, but it just feels like they revolve them a little too much. Pacheco is one of the only consistent things on that offense, and they don't really throw to him. So
yes.
It's which is interesting to me. They use Jerick McKinnon again, and it's not like Pacheco has necessarily bad hands or isn't a great receiver. It's very confusing to me. And again, I get in. Maybe it's Andy Reid trying. He knows their defense can win them games, so maybe he's just right now trying to figure out who do we want to give those minutes to late in games when it matters. Maybe that's Absolutely. What he's doing. But I kind of agree with. I would just start kind of more trial runs with people. Trial runs with certain sets and giving people a little more opportunities. Guys like Sky Moore and Rashee Rice, I think, have a higher ceiling, and I think mesh well and better with Mahomes than a guy like Kadarius Toney or even a guy like MVS to a certain extent. So in my opinion, I do agree with that, where there's almost too many options, and if I'm the Chiefs, I would try to narrow them. And again, I'm not trying to tell Andy Reid what to do, but Mahomes looks at Travis Kelce so much on third down, and that's because he doesn't really know who else seems to be out there on other plays on those big third downs. So I really like you saying that.
I think you hit it spot on. And without going too deep into the analytics here, I would just point out, a standard NFL team, their top receivers, guys like Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Stephon Diggs, they're seeing the field for anywhere between 85 and 95% of snaps, offensive snaps, that being. Whereas you look at a roster like the Dolphins, they've been pretty notorious this year for only having guys like Hill and Waddle on the field for about 65 to 75% of the snaps. And I think for them, it's a little bit of health preservation. The Chiefs, on the other hand, you mentioned Rashee Rice is probably the second touchdown receiver for the Chiefs right now. He's on the field, I think, less than 40% of snaps. Yeah. And that, again, is just because they have that revolving door of receivers they're trying to play. And to your point in what you're saying, I think it is a lot of Andy Reid and Mahomes trying to figure out who, as we get closer to the postseason, are going to be the guys that we want to give those heavy snap counts to. But I think right now we're seeing how it can affect that offense and its rhythm, because you have a guy like MVS, first play of the game, he looks so smooth with the 20-yard reception, and then he's a non-factor for the rest of the night. And I think a lot of it's, guys get cold. If you're a number one receiver option, you're so used to being on the field and running routes, every 2 minutes. And these guys, they're sometimes playing entire series without seeing the field. So,
no, I agree. And with that, we will come to a close, and we will continue with our next box from our NFL grab bag.
Welcome back into the B-Sides of Sports. This is our B segment, and today Drake and I wanted to do a little bit of an NFL grab bag, just considering that we've been away from the podcast for about a month now. So a couple of different topics that we wanted to dive into here. The first being the failed McDaniels experiments that just ended in the Las Vegas Raiders organization. Drake, where do you want to start with this one?
Again, I just think, as I told you, as a head coach with Denver, he was good until he got caught cheating. Then after he got caught cheating, never won a game. And I think now you kind of saw the same thing. Josh McDaniels was an offensive coordinator, and he never had a top 10 offense at any point with either of his two tenures as a head coach. And even with the Patriots, after Tom Brady retired, they struggled immensely, showing again that, was it really him, or was it the system he was in? Very much the question you ask with a lot of these Belichick coaches. The coaching tree is just not strong. Josh McDaniels is no exception.
I wanted to spend a little bit of time here real quickly, on this topic, thinking about the ownership, and I kind of wanted to get your opinion on this as well. But Mark Davis also happens to be the owner of the Aces in the WNBA, and the Aces obviously just won the title back-to-back years now, and obviously a completely different world of kind of front office management and just commitment. But I do think there's something to be said about, knowing how to run a successful franchise, no matter what the scale is, right, at the professional level. Some of those things are translatable, right? And it has been documented over the last week that Davis lost up to $70 to $80 million by blowing up, kind of just the structure that was in place between the head coach, the GM. And to me, I personally applaud him for that. I think it shows that he's willing to kind of double down on the players. It was known that there was a meeting that happened between ownership and the players really aired out how they felt about just the management and how the coaching was happening, and just really see him listen to the players. To me, that was just a really cool thing in sports, and for a franchise that I've spoken very poorly on at that length throughout this season, that was really cool to see. And then today obviously they had a super dominant showing against the Giants. I do think it is correlated. I think there was a newfound belief in that locker room, and again, I just wanted to applaud the ownership for that. I think we don't see that enough in sports, betting on the players and really hearing the people that you're putting your money into, what is their thoughts on the situation.
See, I am the opposite. I do not like Mark Davis, and even with the WNBA background, I think that's a lot easier because payrolling it's a lot easier. Mark Davis notoriously is one of the poorer owners in the league and has struggled to make ends meet. One of the reasons they relocated to Vegas was he needed a new market. Pretty much almost bankrupted himself doing that. And again, to me, that shows a guy who isn't thinking about players, but is instead realizing that he's made so many terrible decisions as an owner that he needed to be bailed out by the NFL, expanding into one of the largest markets for anything. And his neglect, letting Josh McDaniels keep his job, was partially because he didn't have the money to fire him. He only recently did because of the Raiders' success last year. And let me tell you, I've been personally to Allegiant Stadium. That was one of the worst games I've ever been to in terms of on-field production. Very little happened. During a 3-minute commercial break, they had no on-field entertainment. There was just a timer on the Jumbotron that said 3.5-minute TV timeout, and it ticked down and they played music. He is a fraud of an owner. He shouldn't be allowed to own a team, and I think he does well in the WNBA because payrolling it is probably 1/100th. Well, yeah, I don't know what the WNBA salary cap is, but the NFL's is over $200 million. I know that the highest paid WNBA players are barely making millions. So
yeah,
I think
mean, if even it's yeah.
Yeah, And he's yelling at the fans. A fan was giving him crap, and then he started yelling at him. What a child, dude. Are you kidding? You're a billionaire, and this is a drunk fan yelling at you in a game and recording you. It's a trap, and you fall for it. Dude's an idiot. Looks like Chucky. I can't stand him. I wish he was forced to sell the team. It's benign. I hate the Raiders, too. I do not like them. Their fans are very mean. I do not enjoy going to games against the Raiders because for that reason. And I just cannot stand Mark Davis, and I think he's an absolute idiot. And everyone, again, like you said, they're trying to spin it like he did a good thing. No, it would have been a good thing if he did it last year when, they were bottom 10 in offense, bottom 10 in overall defense, and bottom 10 as a team. But no, he kept them. It's neglect. That's what it is, and it's prioritizing a bottom line over a team, and I think he just could not be any more apparent with it.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of that, but I thought that's a really strong take, and I'll take that. I think that's really interesting. We'll move on to our second item here in the NFL grab bag, and that being Drake's take here that the Dolphins are frauds. Tell us some more, Drake.
So, again, I wrote this. I was telling Wilson, I wrote this at night. I was very tired, and I just wanted to get this done. I was a little irritable when I was writing the rundown. And so I don't necessarily think they're frauds. I think they're still a very talented team. But Mike McDaniels is running a very new age team, and with these new age offenses, it usually takes a few years to work out the kinks, and that's, I think, all this is. I think Josh McDaniels is terrible. Mike McDaniels, the coach I meant to be talking about, I think his offense is very fun, very unique. They're trendsetters. They're always on front of trends, and I like that, and I hope they continue to put faith in him I think this team is 2 or 3 years away, truly, from being a true contender. I think they'll always be a good team for the next few years, but they overwhelm bad teams and struggle against good teams. As we've seen, I think the winning record, the wins have come against teams with a combined like .300, like a 300 win rate, and the teams they've lost to have over 70% games won. So I think you just kind of are seeing, that they struggle against these better teams, and because I think they struggle with their identity against those better teams, because usually better teams, better coached, they know what you're doing a little better, while these worse teams, usually younger head coaches aren't as versed. So I really like what Mike McDaniels is doing. I just think us talking about them as Super Bowl contenders this year is a little ridiculous.
Great take. And, early on in the season, I had kind of circled the Dolphins as a wild card team for me. I'd really liked them. I think might have even put them in my AFC championship game. I didn't have them going all the way to the Super Bowl, but I think we're seeing kind of the variance, right? With not just the performances, playing so well against poor teams and underperforming against some of the better teams in the league, but you kind of termed two things here: the Legion of Zoom and the fastest show on turf. And I think that really kind of is their identity right now, and I don't necessarily think that's a strong thing, especially as we get into some of the colder weather and as they go on the road to some of these stadiums where it's not going to be pristine weather conditions. I think the offense is going to struggle, and we know the questions that the defense has. A little concerning to me, just the Chiefs, even though the Chiefs obviously didn't pour it on, the ease at which the Chiefs were able to move the ball early in the game and then at some of the crucial points going into the half against that defense that this week was supposedly getting a lot more healthy. I thought that was concerning, especially given that this Chiefs offense is not nearly as potent as it's been in years past. We saw the Bills put 48 on them. And I think that, I think 2 to 3 years is a reasonable kind of timeline to think that's when this Dolphins team might really come into its own. Because right now, I think the offense, when it clicks, it looks really strong, but I think they don't really have a strong identity to fall back on when the deep ball's not working out for them, and the defense is just all over the place. So I'm with you. I don't really believe in the Dolphins as a true contender this year.
And I will say it's very interesting because while I think a lot of the best quarterbacks in the league right now are kind of these strong arms, right? These guys who can make every throw. Tua isn't in that caliber in terms of, as I've said earlier, what I kind of underrated is his anticipation. I think it's what he does better than 99% of other QBs. He's very anticipatory in his throws. And I think you see issues with that, right? Because again, when you're doing something a little different, his throws are very timing based. A guy like Peyton Manning came into the league and had to change how you could play an NFL offense because his arm was completely based on anticipation because he had a bad arm. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing with Tua in terms of, now don't get me wrong, his arm isn't even comparable to Peyton Manning. I mean, the dude can make an insane array of throws. He just doesn't have the arm strength and talent of, I think, the top 15 or 10 guys, or top 15 or 10, top 5 guys, the Burrow, Allen, Mahomes, Herbert. So don't get me wrong, I think he's a great QB, but I think, again, just going to be a little bit of a learning curve, just like it was for Peyton coming in the league. Took him to a second contract. We've seen a lot of other guys do it on their first. I think with Tua, again, it's going to be that second contract where we finally see them take the jump.
Great point. Moving on then, and I'm going to kind of pull back the curtain here for the audience a little bit, but the third thing listed in our NFL grab bag, Drake just wrote 2 words, AFC sucks. Please elaborate for us, Drake.
It's not that the AFC sucks. It's just like when your 5 seed is a team that has a winning record and hasn't outgained their opponent all season. The Miami Dolphins haven't beaten a winning team. Jacksonville Jaguars are the most boring team in football. And then the top 2, don't get me wrong, I think Chiefs and Ravens are both really good, but even then, Chiefs offense has been weirdly inefficient. Baltimore Ravens have random out-of-character games against the Colts where they just play terrible. So, and the Cleveland Browns, they don't even know who's going to be starting their QB consistently. The Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen turns over the ball. And the New York Jets have Zach Wilson at their QB, who's getting better, but still. So, like, when I'm looking at their playoff picture, it's just like all of these teams have huge glaring issues where I think a lot of the NFC teams are a lot more complete rosters or just a little bit more competent. I'm not trying to bash on the AFC, NFC, or even say it's an argument, but I'm just saying I think the AFC teams all have way more glaring issues than the NFC teams.
And I would argue that there's a correlation. I think if you look at the AFC versus the NFC, the big thing that stands out to me is the quarterback talent in the AFC is just much more superior than the NFC. You've listed the guys, Mahomes, Jackson, Burrow, Allen, Lawrence, Herbert. But when you think about that, for a lot of those guys, not all of them, but they're committing such a high percentage of their salary cap to the QB position. And I think, it diminishes the rest of the roster. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing right now, because while the NFC quarterback talent is a little lackluster, I think we have some of the better defenses in the NFC. I think there's stronger run games in the NFC, and just overall, skill position guys combined with, what teams are able to do with their secondaries and, their defensive and offensive fronts. I think the NFC just has better rosters top to bottom down, even though the AFC might have some of the more top tier talents. And to me, that's the difference when we kind of consider why it kind of looks like on paper some of these AFC teams might be underperforming or just not up to par. I think, again, a lot of that falls on just the salary cap distribution and how much teams have to invest in their quarterbacks.
No, I think that's a good point. I never really kind of considered that in that capacity in terms of why these holes are there. Obviously, when you look at teams individually, but like you said, the AFC is more known for its quarterback talent. So it would make sense if the division as a whole struggles with that, as they have the top tier talent. But no, that's interesting. And again, like I said, I just want to reiterate that kind of like among your vein is, I don't think the AFC necessarily sucks. Like I said, I was a little irritable last night, but I do just think, like I said, outside of the top 2 teams, I think all of those teams have very glaring issues and ones that will be exploited by good teams. And when your top 2 teams are both veteran head coach teams with veteran quarterbacks who know how to win games, gritty or, blowouts, I think it's just a problem for the rest of the division when I really feel like only 2 of these teams could compete with the NFC elite.
Yeah, no, that's very fair to say. The last thing we'll end off here then with our NFL grab bag is kind of a little bit of lottery pick talk, just considering who we think will end up with that first pick. Obviously, there are some stipulations with this one. Carolina's pick is owed to the Bears, so some added leverage there for the Bears because of that trade that happened this past summer. But yeah, who are you going with early on? I guess not early on, halfway through the season. Who does it look like is going to land?
I think, to me, Arizona has been too competent at times, and with Kyler Murray coming back here soon, I just think they won't end up being the number 1 pick like they're projected to be. Right now, I'll read off the top 5. I have it pulled up. So it's Arizona and then Carolina, but the pick is given to Chicago, the New York Giants, and New England Patriots. With the news that Danny Dimes is probably out for the year, Tyrod Taylor is also on IR, Darren Waller's on IR, I really think the Giants have the best chance to lose out because it just feels like a team defeated. It seems like they really aren't playing for anything. The Bears are still fighting. Carolina, that's a team that feels like it's lost all hope. New England is a team that's starting to feel like it's lost all hope. So to me, I think early contenders for the number 1 pick are Carolina and the New York Giants. Would not be surprised by New England. I just think Chicago has too much talent, and they are going to screw around and win some games. If you're almost winning games with Tyson Bagent, you can win games with Justin Fields.
Absolutely. The Giants is where I was going to go with this one. And for many of the points that you outlined there, I think, with Fields for the Bears and Murray for the Cardinals, I just don't see them going winless the rest of the season. They're going to pick some accidental wins for the front office. And again, we talk about those locker rooms aren't trying to lose that game intentionally. So when you're fielding a guy, no pun intended, like Justin Fields or Kyler Murray, I don't think you're going to just lose out per se. And then when we think about the Patriots, to me, I think there's a little bit too much pride in that Belichickian kind of era. I don't see the Patriots going 2-1 I guess it'd be 2-15, right? I think they're going to pick up a couple more wins. We saw them get that improbable one against the Bills. I think there will be a couple more of those, and they just don't lose to the Jets. So to me, that's kind of a circled win on their calendar. So to me, it is between Carolina and the Giants. And like you said, I think the Giants have just really spiraled. Dayball's really struggled in the second year as a coach. The team continues to not come out ready, and now they've got a quarterback carousel happening. The Saquon Barkley's unhappy with the offense. The defense just looks completely, the Raiders, you and I had talked at length at how bad the Raiders offense would look. All of a sudden they dropped 30 with ease today against kind of just that hapless New York defense. So to me, I think it's going to be the Giants or the Panthers. So congratulations to the Bears if they get that while somehow winning games down the stretch of the season.
No, that's very impressive by them. And with that, we are going to go to our C block where we are going to talk our picks on the non-QB MVPs of the season.
Welcome back into the B-Sides of Sports. For our C block today, we wanted to talk about non-quarterback MVPs. So, there's a lot of discussion around the NFL on whether or not the MVP is really just a quarterback award. History, and especially recent history, would tell us that yes, it is. But I think Drake has a couple non-conventional picks here. So where do you want to take this, and which direction do you want to take this in, I should say?
Okay, so I have two that are just players and two that are players who can't physically win the award, and I'll expand on that in a second. So my first two are two that, again, are kind of conventional in terms of at their positions, but again, I think when we're not talking about MVPs, I don't see how more guys have more value than these two, and that's Myles Garrett and A.J. Brown. I've always been a T.J. Watt slanderer and a Myles Garrett supporter, even though not a big fan of Myles Garrett after, some stunts like the Mason Rudolph thing, but, looking away from that, his play on the field is truly dominant. Over a 33% pass rush win rate, which in my opinion is one of the most important stats because that means you're scaring the quarterback, right? That is you winning, essentially. Every snap is a battle for them. That is him winning. Over a third of his snaps is insane. If a quarterback drops back 30 times, that means 10 times he's going to have to deal with Myles Garrett, one of the scariest human beings on the planet. I mean, that's insane. And being a Colts fan, he pretty much single-handedly won them that game. Their offense did not move the ball very well, and outside of getting bailed by penalties late in that game, I mean, he blocked a field goal and forced 2 fumbles. The dude's unreal. There's no one playing as elite football on the defensive end. It reminds me of like Aaron Donald when he was in his prime in terms of the attention you have to have. Myles Garrett's getting triple-teamed. Very few guys have gotten triple-teamed consistently in this league. Aaron Donald's one of the only ones, and Myles Garrett getting it as an edge, I think, is even a little more not so standard because you either have to have 2 tight ends or you're signing 2 linemen. So I just think that's super interesting. And then A.J. Brown, and that's obviously breaking the record for most 125-yard receiving games in a row. After you have 4 or 5, teams are going to be double teaming you, but that just doesn't affect him. Jalen throws a great deep ball, and he's so physical, and his catch rate he reminds me of like D-Hop in his prime in terms of just the dominance at wide receiver position. And I think what he does is just so much more interesting because it's just so he's so physical. He's built like a tight end, but he plays receiver, and I love what he's doing, and I hope he keeps doing it because it's so fun to watch. And then my 2 sort of unconventional picks are Todd Monken, who, as we know, is the Baltimore Ravens offensive coordinator. Those Ravens are humming. Lamar isn't even necessarily playing hero ball, and they're playing well. Ty Huntley comes in after Lamar hurts his ankle. They still move down the field with ease. They should have had 2 touchdowns, but they just kneeled out the ball. I mean, he has this Ravens team finally looking like an NFL offense, and my hat's off to him, and I'm so happy Lamar finally has a solid receiving core when they don't drop the ball, and a competent OC. Now, again, obviously, very first impression, this could collapse on them, but I just love what the Ravens are doing. They bring in an undrafted free agent at running back. Dude runs for 130. I mean, it doesn't matter who is running for them, who's playing for them. They're just producing, and I'm so happy for that team, and Lamar Jackson especially, because I don't know if anyone's been more slandered. No one called the trade for him, and 4 teams were trying to court Deshaun Watson. I just still think that's so insane. And the last one is the entire Jets defense, especially Quincy Williams. The fact that these guys are still in the playoffs even without Aaron Rodgers. Actually, let me check. I don't think they are technically okay. So they'd be the 8th seed right now. But still, what an impressive showing. Zach Wilson is getting better, don't get me wrong, but Quincy Williams, I feel like, was known as Quinnen Williams' brother. But now he's really brought himself to a level where it's Quinnen Williams and Quincy Williams. It's not sort of that, older brother syndrome is kind of how it felt. And just balling out at linebacker, playing great coverage, even being a good pass rusher when they need him to be. The Jets defense is just giving their team to rally something to rally behind, and Zach Wilson is getting confidence because of it. I love what they're doing. The Jets are a fun team to watch every week because you just can't say they don't fight game in and game out. That team fights like very few teams in the league do.
Yeah, I think all four of those are really great. I love the unconventional picks. I think it's super creative. And just a couple quick follow-ups on all of those. Garrett's defense has been absolutely fantastic. He's been a terror to opposing offenses. And I think really it's just highlighted by the overall stature of that defense. You mentioned KC might have the best defense in the league right now. I think it arguably could be Cleveland, just the consistency. And they're able to do it both in the secondary and in the pass rush. Love A.J. Brown. I think there's a lot to be said about a receiver kind of turning an inconsistent thrower. Once he established a number one receiver threat, it's just really strong for them and really can kind of turn around that play. And we've seen that with Hurts a lot. And then Monken and the Jets defense, just can't say enough about both of those. Obviously super integral to the success of both of those teams. I think the big take that I wanted to kind of dive into here quickly is just the idea of the non-quarterback MVP. And in a league where a lot of people want to believe that the quarterback is the most valuable position, arguably so, I do think that we've kind of lost sight of the spirit of what an MVP award should be, right? And, if we want it to be a quarterback award, I think we should just call it the quarterback award. And this to me strikes me as a year where we could have a non-QB MVP. I think there are just so many players, whether it be Hill or A.J. Brown and what they're doing for their team's offense, or it be Garrett or some other, defensive end that's just really changing the game for how the team is able to play week in and week out because of what they're able to do at their position. And what I would pose here is kind of the idea of, if you had to replace that player with someone that wasn't that player, how much does it, affect the team? And so just to quickly use the Dolphins here as the example, I think if you switch Tua with a different quarterback in the league, I think there's a list that could be as long as 15 players who would be able to replace Tua in that system and give them an offseason, and they'd be able to play just as well as Tua's playing. And that's not an indictment on Tua. That's just, speaking to the system and the threats that he has. Whereas if you take Tyreek Hill out of that offense and you replace him with, say the number 14, number one receiver in the league, maybe that's Terry McLaurin, maybe that's Garrett Wilson, I don't think that offense looks remotely the same. And to me, that's where this idea of value comes in, and why I think we really should embrace the non-quarterback MVP a little bit more. There's years where it could be a running back. A couple years ago, we saw Derrick Henry have that historical year. And to me, I just don't think that we need to see unseen things before in order for a non-quarterback to win that award. If the Browns go on to have the number one defense all year, and it's just, paces to be one of the top 10 defenses of the last 40 years. And, they're able to sneak into the playoffs on the back of Myles Garrett. I think he should be considered one of the MVPs of the league. I don't think it always has to be a quarterback.
No, I think that's a great take, right? And to kind of cross sports here, it was like the LeBron James dilemma. You could make an argument that LeBron James, if by that logic, should have been the MVP in the NBA probably like 13 times in terms of what he provides for his team. I mean, you look at the Lakers like this year. I think they're like plus 50 with him on the court and over minus 80 with him off of it, right? And that's with a talented roster. So I agree where it's like guys like that. You use Tyreek Hill. For me, it's someone like again, I would say Lamar Jackson in the Ravens, right? And they have a guy like Ty Huntley behind him, and they don't miss too many steps when he's out. And that's not necessarily because, Lamar isn't fantastic. It's just because they have that system built for a player like that. And like you said, with quarterbacks especially, I think quarterbacks are a little more replaceable because I think, again, there's a starting caliber of guys. If you have a guy, it's like why a guy like Case Keenum threw for 33 touchdowns with the Vikings and they made the NFC championship. That wasn't because Case Keenum had an insane year. That's because he's an above average quarterback who's put in a position to succeed. Same thing with CJ Stroud. I think if you put Bryce Young on the Texans, I don't think they'd be as good, but I still think they're a really good football team. Again, because of the things around him. I think if you put CJ Stroud on the Panthers, I think they're a little better, not a lot. So things like that. And so I completely agree. And I've always said I wish there was just maybe a different award, and that is an offensive player of the year, because I feel like that sets a bad precedent that, the MVP is always a quarterback, but the offensive player of the year, that can be someone else. I think that just sets a bad precedent.
Absolutely. And, just a quick counter to like what you're saying there, and in agreement, I should say here, but, the offensive player of the year arguably is just the guy that has the most kind of eye-blowing stats, right? Like in a year where C-Mac might go for a touchdown every game, it's like, he might be the offensive player of the year. But you could say, across the league, just given how stacked that Niners roster is, a guy like A.J. Brown might be more valuable to his roster and what his team needs, even as, compared to what C-Mac is, even though C-Mac might be the best offensive player on paper, right? And so I think there are ways to differentiate between those two awards. And, hopefully down the stretch, and as we maybe this year, if not in the near future, we're able to see kind of some non-QBs win that award, because it does just feel dominated by QBs over the last decade or so.
They just got to do the NBA thing. I love that the NBA just keeps adding awards, and I get that some of them suck, but like I love clutch moment of the year. I think,
Absolutely,
or, clutch player.
Year, yeah.
I think that's a real fun award. Like I really like that. I wish the NFL would do more of those, and they just really don't. Besides, really like the Walter Payton Man of the Year, they don't even have Most Improved, which is criminal to me. It's what Comeback Player of the Year is kind of lumped into. So like a guy like Geno, could win Comeback Player of the Year, or Christian McCaffrey off an ACL. Again, it just sets a bad precedent. What is a comeback player? Is that someone who came back from a bad year, came back from an injury, I don't know, came back from a different league of football, right? Kevontae Turpin, he came to the NFL from a different league and has been a fantastic kick returner. I just think it's a bad precedent when there's so few awards. And again, I don't think there should be an award for everything, but I just think, like you said, where it's just a little disappointing that they have to be an all-time great season at running back or just a good year from a quarterback is what wins the MVP.
Most definitely. I agree with everything you said there. And I think with that'll close out our pod. Again, apologies for our delay on everything. We appreciate you guys sticking through, especially if you made it to the end of this episode. A huge congratulations to my friend Drake on being married. I think that's a pretty justifiable reason for not recording the podcast over the last month or so, but we're super excited to get back into the swing of things. We hope to be more consistent as we reach this NFL postseason's approaching pretty rapidly, and our NBA coverage will start to pick up pretty soon here. So super excited for things to come, and just thank you for tuning in. Please like, share, and subscribe, do all those things, and we'll see you soon.